Hello and welcome to my video series examining the book Missing 411, Western United States and Canada by the author David Paulides. We will go case by case, and the format will consist of me presenting the case as written without scrutiny, then review any additional or contrary information that I am able to locate through my own research. My sources will be cited in the description below. Daryl Webley. Daryl, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on Saturday, the 30th of April 1949, from Colville, Washington. The Webley family lived on the outskirts of this small town, just 20 miles west of Idaho and directly adjacent to a Native American reservation. On the morning of his disappearance, Daryl was playing in the yard as he often did. It was about 4 p.m. when his parents somehow lost track of him, and just like that, he was gone. The search started with just Daryl's parents. They looked from around the yard and surrounding area while calling out his name. When they could not locate him, they called for local law enforcement, who, in turn, contacted federal authorities for more assistance. The Stevens County Sheriff was in charge of the search, with State Highway Patrol and the Coast Guard assisting. On the first night, nothing of value was found. The following morning, around 5:30 a.m., canines were brought in by the Coast Guard and given Daryl's scent. They took off at a slow run, leading searchers to arrive at a ravine about a mile away from his house. Here, they found Daryl's hat, pants, and one of his shoes. 30 minutes later, searchers found Daryl further up the canyon. A newspaper called the Lewiston Tribune reported, quote, "The boy, Daryl Webley, was almost nude and badly scratched when the dog led rescuers to him. He was cold and wet after his 14-hour experience, during which rain fell and the temperature dropped to 35 degrees. Close quote. Daryl was found to just have a mild case of exposure. In summary, it is important to remember 4 points. 1. Search dogs do not normally work in these situations, but this time they did. 2. It was a cold night with bad weather, and nobody removes clothing when it's moderately cold. 3. Children take the path of least resistance. They move slowly through the brush so as to not get hurt. And 4. Before the dogs arrived, the area where Daryl was found in was searched by 200 people. It just doesn't make sense that he wasn't found by them earlier. The initial search only lasted until midnight. Secondly, the order of events needs some clarification. In the book, it makes it sound as if a number of things happened very quickly in sequence. The family searched, called the sheriff, and the Coast Guard was brought in, with the dogs arriving early the next morning. In reality, however, the parents were gone on a shopping trip at the time, and they had left Daryl with the care of his sister, whose age was not listed but was referred to as young. As such, there could have been a significant delay between when he actually went missing and when his parents became aware of the issue. It's less that he somehow went missing, and more that he was left in the care of somebody who probably shouldn't have been in charge of him, and he was lost track of in that manner. Once they were aware, his parents, neighbors, and sheriff searched until midnight and then stopped. A state patrol sergeant called a search dog trainer at or around 3 a.m., who was then taken in a state patrol car to the scene. The Coast Guard wasn't officially involved. Either the dog trainer or the dog itself were formally affiliated with the Coast Guard, which makes more sense given the situation. Finally, let's look at these claims in the summary. I couldn't leave these unanswered. Point 1. Dogs do often work with at least some degree of success in these cases, although I'll admit that it's common that they don't. Just not quite as common as Missing 411 would have you believe. A study was done in 2015, which estimated the effectiveness of dogs to about 62.9% within the confines of the study. I realize that this study took place after the publication of Missing 411, but I'm including it here because I've shown instances where dogs were used to great effect without being noted in these books. This also goes to show that it's not particularly mysterious when they are not effective. After all, 63% effectiveness is certainly high enough to be worth trying, but also low enough that it shouldn't surprise anybody when it fails. Number 2 is the most egregious claim in my opinion, and is a direct quote from the book. Nobody removes clothing when it's moderately cold. There are numerous studies which directly contradict this statement, most of which deal with so-called paradoxical undressing and hypothermia cases. However, I'm not sure that this case in particular has anything to do with paradoxical undressing, as just one of the many instances that we've already covered of a child removing their clothing either intentionally, as they often do, or clothes being pulled away by the numerous bushes that he went through. Point 3. Children do not normally take cause and effect into account when it comes to personal injury, or indeed at all. Daryl in particular was only 2 years old and likely did not have enough brain development to understand much of what he was going through. 2-year-olds are not typically careful by any means. Point 4. I'm not sure where Paulides sees that there were 200 searchers, as every article that I read had the number 100 or more than 100 listed. Perhaps Paulides was able to find a source that I wasn't able to. No article I ever saw said that the specific place that Daryl was searched was found before. If you have that source, please leave it in the comments below. Keith Parkins. Keith Parkins, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on April 10th, 1952 from Ritter, Oregon. He is in the Washington chapter because it is close to the Southeast Washington cases. On the day that Keith disappeared, he was visiting his grandparents' farm outside of the city of Ritter. Ritter is on the far northeast corner of the state, close to a national forest and wildlife area. The area is very rugged and close to a couple of rivers as well. It isn't clear from newspapers exactly why Keith went missing, but he wandered away from his grandparents' home around noon on Wednesday. Law enforcement was called and there was a large response. The search continued through the first night, but then the story starts to get a little bit murky. Normally, searches for a 2-year-old would be confined to a 2-mile radius. 95% of all children 1 to 3 years old who go missing in cold temperatures are found within 2 miles of the place they went missing in a rural setting. For some reason, in this case, however, searchers knew about where the boy would end up, and they chose to search an unbelievable 12 miles away. Even more unbelievable, they found him there. To get where he was found, newspapers at the time noted that he had to climb over numerous fences, cross icy creeks, and go over 2 mountains. Keith's father said in one interview that Keith must have been running for nearly the whole 19 hours that he was missing in order to get where he was found. The 10th of April was a Thursday, not a Wednesday. I believe, judging from newspapers at the time, that the Wednesday is the correct part. Thus, Keith went missing on Wednesday, April 9th, 1952. Also, Keith was not just 2, but 2.5. Half a year is a small difference, but not in the early years when that accounts for about 1/4 of your total life. It's strange to me how sometimes Paulides will note down to the month how old someone is, but in this case he says, at the age of 2. Let's tackle the distance that Keith covered next. Keith went missing from a barn, not the house proper, around noon when called in for a meal. This is noted in the Missing 411 movie, but not in the book. Here is the proposed path in the movie. As you can see, they noted a barn as the point where he went missing, then they point out a set of footprints, then to where Keith himself was found. The footprints were not mentioned in any article that I was able to find. I'm not saying that it was never reported, just that in the dozens of articles that I read, it wasn't mentioned even once. Since it's not mentioned in the book either, and that's what we're covering, and not the movie, then I'll just drop the footprints entirely. The reason why I mention it at all, since we are throwing them out anyway, is we get a very solid quote from Les Strout, also known as Survivor Man, talking about Keith's proposed journey. I won't play the actual clip here since I don't want copyright drama, but the relevant clip starts at 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 52 seconds, and carries on for about the next 20 seconds. Les Stroud says that it's a 3-mile line to the footprints, then a 5-mile straight line to where Keith was found. As you can see from this still, the proposed path actually makes a sort of triangle. We can use this to determine how far Keith actually was from his house. I brought this still into Photoshop, with my original plan being to measure out the length in pixels across this 5-mile line. I wasn't able to get a very accurate estimate though, since we're at an angle and my Photoshop skills are actually pretty weak. Using the primitive method of just using the line tool, my guess was between 2 and 3 miles in a straight line between the barn and where he was found. Luckily, I got some help with identifying landmarks and topography, and I'm now confident enough to present where I think this is on an online map. The area and topography look consistent to me, as well as the street names given in the movie. Here, we can measure with much greater accuracy if this is indeed the correct area. As you can see, the actual distance is just over 3 miles. Again, as Les points out, you don't travel in a perfectly straight line in practice. Look at this map again. If we follow the path of least resistance, we end up going along a road for most of the journey, and not really changing in elevation very much. If this route is correct, or at least close to correct, the path taken is about 3.5 miles. The idea that he traveled 12 miles is not an option in my opinion. Quote, yes, a searcher was 12 miles from the grandparents' home when he found the boy lying unconscious in a creek bed. Close quote. No, he wasn't. Next, let's consider the timing and speed. The average walking speed of a 2-year-old is about 1.7 miles per hour over level ground. Given the relatively short distance traveled, the idea that he didn't likely travel much at night makes sense as well. Sunset for Ritter is about 7:40 p.m. in April, so Keith had 7 hours to travel less than 4 miles. Last is this claim of one of the searchers knowing something, so that's why they went to the spot that was too far away for a regular search. Keith was located by a search party which included his own father. Unless he knew something too, it's unlikely that anybody knew anything about where he would be found. More pertinent, as we have already discussed at length, Keith was actually very close to the 2.8 mile radius quoted in the Lost Person Behavior book. Oh, right. I should mention that the actual radius is 2.8 miles, not just 2, for a mountainous area. I would also point out that while most children in the study were found within 2.8 miles, that doesn't mean that you just hit the radius and then stop. I hope that this is obvious. To go along with this thought, as Paulides has cited this book, I will infer that he believes that it is a legitimate, reliable source. As such, I will be using the book as a source moving forward, even if it is not first quoted by Paulides. Lastly, even Keith's father thought that it was likely that Keith had just made a wrong turn and gotten lost. No foul play or anything like that. Richard Herman, who was 6 years old at the time, went missing at noon on Saturday, August 30th, 1959, from Emigrant State Park, Oregon. Richard and his family were visiting the park from Sunnyside, Washington for a vacation. During their stay, Richard met with some children of other families, and they played together. August 30th was one such occasion, and Richard was playing hide and seek around noon. However, it was discovered that he had disappeared. Immediately, the family searched the area. Soon after, a call was made to the local sheriff to ask for assistance. Richard was not found that day. The next day, around 8 a.m., a sheriff's deputy was searching on horseback when he spotted Richard walking down the trail. He was miles away from where he had gone missing and was now near Meacham, Oregon. He was tired and hungry, but doctors said that he was otherwise in remarkably good condition. Similar to the last case, from what I can tell, Richard went missing on the day before Missing 111 reports it, on Saturday, August 29th. He was found on Sunday. There is some discrepancy with the last name having 1 or 2 N's, but it is reported both ways. As for the time frame of when he went missing, from the articles that I read, I get the impression that it wasn't noticed right away. The children were playing unsupervised since early that morning, and the children returned around noon. When they came back, Richard wasn't with them. As such, it could have been hours before the alarm was raised. Lastly, his good condition was explained. He was well dressed for the weather, having a heavy jacket and jeans over the top of his pajamas, which protected him from the chilly 40-degree night. James McCormick Jr., who was 16 years old at the time, went missing on Tuesday, December 5th, 1961, from Lark Mountain, Multnomah Falls, Oregon. On the 4th of December, the day before James Jr. went missing, he and his father, James Sr., and their dog went out on a hunting trip to Larch Mountains for bobcats. The weather quickly turned sour though, and heavy rain hit the area. The rain turned to snow, and the three got a little bit turned around in it all. They spent that night huddled in a tree for protection. The next day, on the 5th, they set out to find their way back home. As they traveled, James Jr. became delirious for some unexplained reason, and he had to be carried by his father. His father carried him for about 3 hours before he became exhausted and had to put him down. James Sr. told his son to stay put and that he would be right back. He thought that he had seen headlights up ahead and would investigate on his own. When James Sr. returned to where he left James Jr. just moments ago, he was nowhere to be seen. James Sr. searched the area for about an hour before once again trying to find his way back to civilization for help. It was many hours before he finally stumbled onto a lodge. He was able to call for aid. 200 off-duty firefighters, who were co-workers of James Sr., came out to search in addition to the sheriff. Planes and canines were also employed. Before long, some of James Jr.'s belongings were found. His glasses case, socks, and boots were somewhat near where he had been left by his father. Later that day, James Jr. was found laying at the bottom of a slight cliff, about 300 yards from where his belongings were found. He was dead. The appearance of the body made searchers believe that he had not died from the fall and had perhaps perished from exposure, but no definitive answers were ever given. Gladys asked the question, what lights in the wilderness could possibly be mistaken for headlights? This case is interesting to me due to the high number of contradicting reports from the newspapers. Let me show you an example of what I mean. This article says that James died from a fall in the title, but no evidence is listed or produced. This article says that he was found at the top of the cliff, not the bottom. I will present information that I found that is agreed upon by the majority of reports that seem to have the most detailed information. James Jr., his father, and their dog went bobcat hunting on Saturday, December 2nd, 2 days before missing 411 claims. The storm hit and they got lost and huddled under a tree that Saturday night, but they couldn't start a fire for warmth. Sunday, at some point, James Jr. falls ill. It's not specified why or how, but the weather at the time was so frigid, it would later inflict frostbite so severe on James Sr. that doctors would consider amputating some of his toes. Further, they had not packed any substantial food, so they didn't have anything to eat since Saturday afternoon. James Sr. carries his son in order to keep moving forward. Sunday night, in the dark, James Sr. can carry his son no further. He puts James Jr. down to rest. At this point, James Jr. is described as irrational and delirious. His father did not elaborate on what he meant by this. Looking into the distance, James Sr. either sees some lights or he wants to go to a nearby ridge to see if he can spot any lights. It is reported both ways. When he returns a few minutes later, his son is missing. It is completely dark now, so looking for James is practically impossible. After searching for a while, James Sr. resolves to get help as quickly as possible. It is not until Monday morning that he stumbles upon the lodge. Once there, help is called for. Firefighters, who know James Sr. from his occupation, come out in droves to support him and help locate his son. The search continues all day and into the next day. A glasses case, boots, and socks are found at or near where James Sr. had left his son on Saturday night. It is Tuesday afternoon when James Jr.'s body is found near a cliff. He had crawled up near a tree, covering himself with a piece of bark for warmth. The coroner found no marks of violence on the body and ruled his death as being caused by exposure and exhaustion. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video all the way to the end. Until next time, take care.